Hello and welcome. This is the bitsvsbytes podcast. I am your host, I'm Kukic, and today with me is Kukic. He is the Developer Evangelist Lead at Auth0, and we're going to talk about what they do. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
No problem. So, could you tell me a little bit about yourself, about your background, and also how you got to Auth0?
Sure, absolutely. So I've been a software developer, software engineer for the last 10 or 12 years. And the way I kind of got into coding and software development in the first place was a buddy of mine needed a website. And I've always been kind of the nerdy guy, always working with computers, playing video games. So he reached out to me and he asked me, "Hey, you know things about computers, right?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, of course." And he's like, "Okay, can you make me a website and I'll pay you like $500?" I was like, "Yeah, absolutely." And at the time, I had never built a website, never done any real sort of software development. I tried to make a few games with RPG Maker and just kind of fooled around. But when the prospect of $500 was falling into my lap at 15 years old, I was like, okay, I'm going to figure this out. And that's kind of how I got my start in web development. And after about 8 to 10 years of freelancing, of working with various different startups, another friend that worked at Auth0, he reached out to me and said, "Hey, we're hiring at Auth0. We're looking for people that are passionate about teaching others, and we need somebody to write on our blog." And education has always been one of my big passions. I've always loved teaching people. I wanted to go to university and eventually be a professor, but this seemed like a good alternative to going to school for an additional 5-6 years. So I joined Auth0 as a technical writer, and that really meant writing blog posts on all sorts of technology. So, my job was basically research and development, and then writing about it and teaching others how to integrate Auth0, how to work with identity, kind of learning all the different standards that kind of manage how identity is managed. And that's kind of how I got my start.
Yeah, so that's interesting that you mentioned the whole writing part. So why was that important to Auth0 to do it in that fashion? So using blog posts and stuff like that to help people get to use their product?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Auth0 was one of the first companies to really start focusing on content marketing. And they saw a real void available in the market of educating developers, right? Developers love learning new things. They love to try new technologies out. And what Auth0 decided to do was created this blog at auth0.com/blog and just write technical articles on the cool and unique things that our engineers and our developers were working on, and just kind of start writing that content and posting it out there. So at the beginning, the Auth0 blog didn't even have a lot of Auth0 promotion. And kind of a funny story about that, since I'm a developer evangelist now and I go to a lot of different meetups, a lot of different conferences and talk to people, I'll usually mention, "Hey, I'm from Auth0 and I do so and so." And they'll come up to me and say, "Hey, I love your blog. How do you guys make money?" And I'm like, "Well, we have this identity platform that makes it really easy for you to, integrate into your web applications." And they're like, "No, you guys are a blog. I don't believe you."
So they don't even know what the product is. It's so much into the technical details and stuff like that they don't even know what the actual product is.
Yep, exactly. And I think on one hand, that's really good for the developers that our content is so platform agnostic and that you can still learn a whole lot of things without necessarily, needing Auth0.
Yeah.
But on the other side, we would like to people to at least try Auth0 and give it a try and see if it solves their solution.
Yeah,
problems.
So you mentioned it a little bit what you do. So could you tell a little bit about that? So what kind of service do you try to provide with Auth0?
Yeah, so Auth0, we kind of build the platform as a universal authentication and authorization platform for your web, your mobile, and even your legacy applications. And what I mean by that is, we want to make it as easy as possible for you as the developer to implement identity, to implement standards compliant identity with OAuth 2.0, OIDC Connect, and other technologies, just to kind of abstract that from your application so that you as a business can focus on building the things that you're really good at. Identity is kind of a solved problem for the most part, but it is very complex. So if we can make it easier for you to implement user authentication and authorization so that your team can focus on building the rest of their application, their unique features, then we'll kind of have done our job.
Yeah. So how does someone go about actually using Auth0? So, say for instance, I'm going to start a project. How can I start?
So the best way to get started is just to head over to auth0.com, AUTH0, the number 0.com, and we have a very simple sign-up process. You can sign up with either create an email and password account or sign up with GitHub or Google or any of those social providers. From that point on, we'll just ask you what type of application you're building, what language, what framework, and we'll either provide you an SDK for it or a quick start to help you get started. So if you're building a brand new application, downloading the quick start is probably the easiest way where you can be up and running in as little as 5 to 10 minutes. If you already have an existing application and you just want to try Auth0 and see if it's going to solve your problems, then we have SDKs for all the major languages and frameworks. So whether you're working with PHP or Go or Java, whatever language, whatever platform you have, or it's very likely that we have an SDK or a quick start for it. And if by some miracle you're working on a brand new language that doesn't have any, that's kind of not well known, is just kind of up and coming, and we don't have an SDK for it, then we do also have a REST-based API where, as long as you can make an HTTP call, you can interface with Auth0.
Very cool, because that's of course important. I mean, when people are working on the project, they usually like to just use the language that they're comfortable with, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so why would someone use Auth0 instead of just implementing themselves? Because what normally happens is that someone will start off building a system, and they will do the user management and the login and the sign up and everything like that. So why would they use a third party for that? What's kind of the advantages to doing that?
Sure. So one of the big advantages is kind of future-proofing your application, and a lot of developers that I talk to on a daily basis just do have that mentality of, hey, I'm building this really simple app, so I just need a simple login system, a username and password, and it's kind of one and done. But in reality, as soon as you kind of release that app, your product manager, your product owner is going to want additional features, and identity and user management is one of those things that is constantly evolving, that constantly needs updates. So if you do decide to build it yourself, then you're not only responsible for handling that, username and login page. You also have to worry about password resets. You have to worry about, in the future, if the business owner wants to add social connections, then you have to integrate with all of these different APIs. If you get an enterprise customer that wants to integrate single sign-on into your application, then you need to build that. And on top of building all these features, now you're responsible in maintaining it and fixing all the, applying patches, fixing bugs, and constantly monitoring the application to ensure that everything is working smoothly. And in case it doesn't, like if your identity solution fails, if somebody breaches your user database, then a lot of sensitive information can get out, which, you don't want that to happen, and you don't want to end up on the front page of Hacker News or Reddit or, the New York Times, depending on what your business is.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I mean, a lot of people are working on their product and want to get their product better, of course, and they want to make the best product that they can. But usually, identity and logging in and stuff like that is not your core business of your application, right? And that's one of the things that I always try to talk to people about is that they're saying, okay, maybe this solution, when I implement it, it will cost me more over time because I'm getting more users or whatever. But they forget that they also need to manage it, right? So if, for example, as you said, we had it a little while ago where Google stopped with Google Plus, and they were like, okay, yeah, you need to switch over to different APIs and call different things. Yeah, then we were like, okay, I have to spend, I don't know, 1 or 2 weeks, for example, of my precious development time on changing that, on putting it on something else, right?
Right, exactly. And the thing too is, I'm sure every company has great developers, but not every company has security experts working on their identity platform, working on their user management systems. And it's one of those things that's very easy to mess up. It's very easy to make a small mistake that can snowball into something huge that could potentially sink your entire company. So for that reason, our team at Auth0, we currently have close to 500 employees. Many of those work in our engineering department, and around the clock, their sole duty, their sole responsibility is to build the best possible authentication and authorization platform. So, we want to kind of give you that peace of mind that if you do decide to go with Auth0, and even if it's not Auth0, if you're using AWS Cognito or a different identity platform, whether you use us or a different platform, I truly believe that your application is going to be much more stable. So my goal is really just to get developers to not roll their own identity anymore, and whether they use Auth0, Cognito, or a different SaaS platform to manage their user identities, I see that as an absolute win.
Okay, so yeah, that makes total sense. And I was wondering, so when you look at the security, for example, a lot of people are still using like plain text passwords and stuff like that. So and even without two-factor authentication, right? So they use their plain passwords. They just log in and use the same passwords mostly for all kinds of different websites. So how do you see that changing in the near future? Do you think people will be using that more and more, or how do you see that changing?
That's a really, really good question. And yeah, I totally agree with you that, the people still, they kind of rely on that username and password whenever they are forced to use two-factor authentication, instead of thinking of it as an enhanced kind of security feature to protect their account. They see it more as a hindrance of, man, why do I have to go look at my phone now and look and copy this code? And so one of the big problems to enhance security, and especially two-factor authentication, is kind of convenience, right? And for us, kind of millennials or younger folks or people that work in the industry, it's a little bit more clear why we need it and the benefits it provides. But on the other hand, you also have people like my parents who are, in their mid 50s. They can barely use a cell phone, and now asking them to remember their username and password, to have a unique password for every website that they access, and then also to know how two-factor authentication works for each of those unique websites is kind of a tall order, and um, something that's really holding back the adoption of greater security. But I think the good news on that front is there's a lot of upcoming standards. There's a lot of different companies are trying different things out to kind of make that a much more convenient experience. So, for example, if you Google does a really good job with their accounts, where once you log in, if it detects that you're logging in from a different location, so it's kind of using anomaly detection to see if this login was is kind of out of the ordinary.
Yeah.
Then it's going to kick off that two-factor authentication flow, and in many cases you'll just get a pop-up on your phone saying, hey, are you trying to log in? Click yes or no, and you hit yes, and it logs you in. And at Auth0, we kind of have those similar capabilities. But I think one of the potentially huge game changers in the near future is an open standard called Webauthn, that is aiming to kind of eliminate the need for passwords from the end user forever. And basically, the way that works is it relies on a hardware token or a hardware key. So when you go to a website, you click the login button, you just put in your key, and it authenticates you. So you no longer have to remember a unique combination. You no longer have to remember a different password. It's just automatically generated for you with basically cryptology. And I think that could go a long way in securing applications and also making it easier for the masses, for new internet users, for older internet users who just don't see the safety factor and would prefer convenience over enhanced security.
Yeah, so that new standard, I haven't heard about it yet, because I do know, of course, there are a lot of hardware tokens. They are also used for doing two-factor authentication as well, of course. But how does that work? So say, for instance, because that also has its problems, right? So if I have something hardware, so if I have a key in my pocket or whatever, I can also just I can lose it, right? I can just lose it somewhere, or it can break or whatever. How would that work? That's one of the things that I'm then worried about. Is, of course, your password you can forget as well. That makes sense. But how would that work for a hardware solution as well? How does it work?
Sure. So the standard is still kind of in the process of being finalized. They have a really good draft out, but essentially with the Webauthn protocol, you can. It doesn't have to be a specific hardware token. Like you can use your Google phone, for example, your Android device as the hardware token itself,
okay.
or on your laptop, for example, you can use Touch ID, or if you have any sort of encryption features available on your laptop on a different device that you're using, your computer, then you can use those for the registering and also kind of creating that account. So it's still in the process of being fully defined. We at Auth0 are also in the process of making that a feature available in the platform.
Yeah.
We do have a really cool demo at webauthn.me available, where you can actually go through the flow and it explains step by step how you create a user, how you register it, and how you use that authenticator. So I would definitely encourage you, if you're looking to learn more, if this is something that is interesting to you, to check it out at Webauthn, auth, and then the letter n.me, or you can even Google it, and I'm sure there's a whole bunch of different resources that can help you learn a little bit more about this upcoming standard.
That's interesting. So that is an open source standard, right?
Mm-hmm, yep.
Okay. So is that when you look at your company, is that also something that you try to contribute to, these kinds of projects?
Yeah, absolutely. So our company was it was founded by developers for developers, and everything that we do, all the software that we put out, is tailored and aimed at making the developer experience a lot easier. So in addition to kind of having the Auth0 platform, we maintain a number of open source projects, something like over 700 different ones. And some of the big ones there are the JSON Web Token node library. So if you've ever used JSON Web Tokens with any node application, you've likely used one of our packages. And so one of our kind of big cadences is to give back to the developer community and make their lives easier. So a lot of the software that you're using, especially if you're in the Node world, just because we were started as a Node.js, kind of our infrastructure was Node.js at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of code that we built originally, if we could, we open sourced it and made it available, and have had a lot of really good feedback from the developers. And many times developers are using our software, our open standard implementations, without even knowing that it's us that kind of maintain and support those.
Very cool, very cool. And one question that came up to me while you were talking about that. So there are all these kinds of standards, right, and all these kinds of authentication providers and stuff like that. And you, of course, implement those. Say, for instance, sign in with Google, or the sign in with Apple thing that is coming up. How do you keep up with that, and how do you actually choose which ones you're going to implement? Because that can seem like a hard choice in some cases. So, say, for instance, someone is using, I don't know, some obscure thing that they really want to. How do you actually choose which ones are interesting for you?
So we try to support as many social providers as possible, as many different APIs as possible, and since our platform is it's built on open standards. It's built on OAuth 2.0 and OpenID Connect. We have a number of kind of built-in integrations with the major social providers. So whether that's Google, Facebook, GitHub, PayPal, we kind of have a list of about 40, 50 that we support out of the box. And what I mean by out of the box, I just mean you go into the Auth0 dashboard and you check a box saying, yes, I want LinkedIn login. And all you give us is your LinkedIn API key, and that's all you have to do. Now, if there is a social provider that we don't support out of the box, that's not in our initial list of kind of 40, 50 that we maintain, we also allow you to create a custom social connection, in which case it's just a couple of extra checkboxes that you have to click, and and basically as long as that third party is OAuth and OpenID Connect compatible, we can add them in a manner of 5-10 minutes. So you just give us the endpoints, the authorization server URLs, as well as your API key for that provider, and basically you can have unlimited possibilities for who you integrate with. And since the industry has widely adopted OAuth and OpenID Connect as kind of the standards going forward, we could very easily integrate with those.
Very cool.
But,
Yeah, that's something I didn't expect to happen there. So, because in most cases people would say, okay, I'm just going to use the standard ones like Google, as I said, or whatever, and just do that, and that's it. But what I was wondering about was, so security is tricky, right? So it is a tricky thing, and especially when you need to give data to a third party. In your case, you're holding a lot of information that's pretty sensitive. I mean, usernames and passwords are usually one of the most sensitive things that you can have in an application. So how do you build that trust? So how do you kind of make sure that someone can trust you as a company, but also knows that the data is safe, for example, and stuff like that? So how do you do that?
So another one of our kind of major cadences within the company is radical transparency, and really what we mean by that is that we are as open as humanly possible with our customers, with the developers that use our platform. So any sort of incidents that may occur, whether it's unplanned downtime or as much as I'd love to say that we are an impenetrable fortress that has never been hacked and will never be hacked. That's not a promise that we can give to anybody. But what we can do is really just do our best, do our due diligence, ensure that the code that we're writing, that we're pushing out, is thoroughly reviewed by our security experts, and that everything works to the best of our abilities. And luckily, the company was founded in 2013. So we've been around for about a little over 6 years now. And in that time, we haven't had any major incidents. And we currently work with some of the biggest companies in the world, kind of entrust us. So Atlassian, for example, is one of our really big customers.
Yeah.
That relies on us for all of their identity, just because they didn't want to build it themselves, because they knew it was such a daunting task. And currently we process something like 2.5 billion logins per month. So
crazy.
Yeah. So we've gotten, I want to say we've gotten really good at that anomaly detection, at pushing out code that is as secure as it could possibly be. And one of the things that one of our chief architects always hammers into me is that you're not allowed to say, that you can never say 100% certainty that something is secure.
No.
You can say that it's as secure as possible, but nobody will ever build a system that's 100% impenetrable and 100% secure.
No, and that's also why one of the reasons why a lot of companies have bounty programs, right? So they kind of not encourage it, but they really they do offer kind of compensations or whatever, just to people that can actually find flaws in their security, right?
Yeah.
Is that also something you do, or is it something that you look at differently?
Yes, absolutely. So we are powered by on our website. If you go to the very bottom in the footer, there is a white hat section that kind of goes into our responsible disclosure program. So in the event that a bug is discovered that kind of impacts customers or could impact customers, we have a policy of how we responsibly disclose any issues that might occur. But then also in that section, we have the discovering security vulnerabilities. So if you do come across something that allows you access to parts of Auth0 that you shouldn't have, if you do responsibly disclose it to us, allow us to fix it, then we do have that bug bounty program, and we definitely encourage people to report those. And we also do a number of annual audits where we'll invite security experts and kind of let them do an audit of our system and see if there's any potential issues they find that way. But if you do come across, you're using our API and you can do something that you shouldn't, if you if you do report it to us, we'll be happy to compensate you for that and hopefully fix the problem as soon as possible.
Very good, very good. So, what I was wondering about for the privacy part, to get back to that a little bit. So, say for instance, we're in Europe, or actually, our company is in Europe, and we're kind of doing business with an American company. If you work with Auth0, of course. So, how does that go with your data? So, say for instance, my users and passwords and everything like that. Can I like pick where my data is stored, and how does that work?
Sure. So we are a U.S. based company, but we do have offices in London, in Tokyo, Japan, as well as Australia and Argentina. Um, and we do have data centers in the US, in the European Union, as well as in Australia. So if you're using our cloud-based SaaS platform, then when you create your account, when you create your tenant, you tell us which region you're in. So if you're in Europe, you can select the EU region, and that's going to ensure all your data is in Europe. Another thing we can do, though, for companies such as banks or healthcare companies that have even stricter requirements and kind of need to own that data, need to have full control over it. We can also do a private cloud instance where we install the Auth0 platform, so it's fully managed. We manage all of the updates, manage all of the features for you, but it's installed and deployed in your private cloud infrastructure. So in your AWS infrastructure, if you have it, we can deploy there and manage it for you.
Ah,
So
okay.
so we have a lot of customers that kind of prefer that because they need to have full control over their data. They're kind of guided by certain standards or certain rules and regulations that make it really hard to use a publicly available SaaS. So we can definitely do that for those customers.
And how do so I can imagine that as you said, there are a lot of certifications and things that people need to go through, right? So what kind of certifications do you have, right? So there are a lot of, say for instance, if you're in healthcare, you need some of the certifications that are in there. So which ones do you have, and how do you go about that?
So we have a number of ISO certifications. So 27001, 27001, and 27018. We are HIPAA compliant in the United States, GDPR compliant in Europe, and then as well as compliant with the OpenID standard, so OAuth 2.0, as well as OpenID Connect in the kind of financial world, SOC 2 compliant, PCI DSS, and all of those. So we have a number of those standards and certifications available at our public cloud. But again, if you do need that, additional certifications,
Yeah.
then we can do a custom deployment, a kind of a custom infrastructure for you and work with you to get in compliance with what your business or what your company needs.
So we touched on this a little bit before, but where do you kind of see this whole space around authentication and identity going into the future, right? So is it going to change dramatically? As you said, you have that open standard that's probably coming out. But where do you see that going? Because in some cases, I still feel like we have a pretty okay system when you look at usernames and passwords and two-factor authentication, but it still feels like something that's from, I don't know, maybe 15 or 20 years ago. And it doesn't feel like it's current, right? With all the technology that we have around us. So where do you see that going in the future?
Right. I think the future of identity management is bright. It's and I think it's I think identity for the most part is a solved problem, a solved solution for managing the type of data that a company should have on the user. And I know, like for example, GDPR is kind of forces you to think differently about the type of data collect, how you store it. So I think government regulation, whether in Europe or in the US, is going to shape at least somewhat the future of identity. But I think the protocols they're evolving at such a rapid pace, and it's such a complex field that I could see in the near future, maybe 5-10 years, that people will look at identity management like they look at database software, right? You wouldn't typically go out and build your own database software unless you had a really, really good reason to do it. You would go to Firebase or Mongo or Postgres or any of those databases, use their solution, and if you outgrew it, if your company got so massive that you needed to build your own custom database, then you would kind of venture. But at that time, you would have the resources to be able to kind of change the game.
Yeah,
I can see identity going that same path in the near future, where companies like Auth0, like AWS Cognito, they provide everything you need to get started out of the box, and then it's just going to be a number of checkboxes where you say, yes, I want my users to be able to log in with a social provider. Yes, I need single sign-on for these applications. So developers are, I'm hopeful that in the next 5 to 10 years, developers are no longer burdened with building that login page, maintaining that login page, and they can just drop in a ready-to-go solution and focus on building their unique value proposition and their unique applications.
Yeah, we are actually in the process of testing these kinds of solutions ourselves. So we're currently looking actually at Auth0 as well, just to see how that works and to see how that would integrate into a product. But we also tested out. Actually, you said it to me the last time we talked that Firebase is also a good option to look at. And we tested with that, and we kind of made a first kind of version of kind of user management and stuff like that in like a few hours, right? Instead of something that, and in those few hours, you already had things like, okay, I forgot my password, all the templates that surround that, signing in, logging out, everything like that was already in a few lines of code. It was already there, right? And that's I think the power of using a service like Auth0, but also Firebase or Cognito or whatever you want to call. That's the beauty of it, that you don't need to spend because if I look at it from our perspective, we maybe would have spent like maybe 1 or 2 weeks just building this out, right? And that's it.
Yeah, that's kind of the big draw of using one of these platforms, is that they typically have a custom built UI that you could just drop into your application.
Exactly.
So Firebase has their I forget what it's called. I think it's like FireAuth or something like that. That you just kind of include the JavaScript package. It builds the UI for you. Auth0, for us, we call our kind of custom UI that you could fully customize. We call it Lock. So it's kind of the same thing. You bring in a JavaScript library. When the user hits that login button, they get a really nice UI, or they get redirected to Auth0 to log in, where you still have full control over the look and feel of that experience. But at the end of the day, it's kind of a standardized experience. So the more, and one thing that I've noticed across all the different companies that are in the identity space, that their login forms kind of look and feel almost exactly the same.
For sure.
So we're kind of reaching that convergence point of, yes, this, whether I'm using a app on my Android device, or I'm on a website, or logging in with my TV, logging in, on my smart TV, the login experience is gonna be very familiar to me. So as as we move forward, I think it's gonna kind of hit that main convergence point where everything, it's such a ingrained thing in our minds of how to log in, how this works, that hopefully we can not even think about identity in the future and just have it work seamlessly.
Yeah, and a good example of that is actually the thing that's being done with the whole biometric thing, right? So the Face ID on Apple smartphones, but also just the fingerprint readers on almost any phone you have right now. It has a fingerprint reader built in. But what I like about that is we actually got Apple Pay yesterday for our bank here in the Netherlands, and that's something that has even more kind of sensitivity around it. Of course, it's your bank account and everything like that. But when you see how that experience is like, when you kind of just press the power button 2 times and just do Face ID and then you can pay, I mean that feels secure, but it also is convenient, right? And that's where you want to get, because a lot of people say, yeah, security actually automatically means that it's going to be more work for the user. But I think that needs to, as you said, that's one of the things that really needs to change, is that it has to be easy for someone to use. They need to get it like instantly. Isn't that that's it, right?
Yep, exactly. It's we can have the best security system in the world. We can have multi-factor authentication that requires you 3-4 stages of you put in your username and password, and then you get a code, and then you have to answer a security question.
Yeah.
And then we could talk all day about how deep we can add our security. But at the end of the day, if it's not convenient, if it forces the user to do something out of the ordinary, out of kind of what they're used to, they're not going to want to use it. So, I think a lot of times we try to scare the user into using these 2-factor authentication solutions, or these multi-factor authentication solutions, but the users hate it, not because not because they don't believe in it, but because it's inconvenient. And people will always go for the path of least resistance. So if they can turn off 2FA, if they can use log in with their fingerprint for everything, even if it's more insecure, I think finding that correct balance of security and convenience is going to be one of the biggest challenges for Auth0. And I think the first company that kind of gets that balance right is going to do really good in this space.
Yeah, for sure. So to wrap up, I have one more question. The last question I always ask in the podcast. So, what are you most proud of since you started working at Auth0?
There is a lot of things to be proud of at the company, but I think one of the biggest ones that makes me really proud is a program that we launched about 2 years ago called the Auth0 Ambassador Program. And the idea behind that program is we want to encourage local developer communities to be more informed about identity and security challenges. So what we did with the Auth0 Ambassador Program is we invited folks that are not part of Auth0, that are not Auth0 employees, to join this program, where we would help them, where we would provide knowledge, where we would share kind of the things we were working on, the open standards, and provide really in-depth knowledge and training for individuals that are not our employees, that are not affiliated with Auth0, and also give them provide them financial assistance to either host meetups in their local cities or regions, or even go to conferences around the world to speak about security and identity concepts. And if they can rope Auth0 into that, great. But we really just want we really just want to give back to the community at large and make everybody more aware of the security and identity challenges that are out there. So, I've run that program for about 2 years now. And last year we had over 230 events that our ambassadors did. And it's just been an amazing way to give back and also interact with the developer community worldwide.
Yeah, and that's the cool thing, right? Seeing that it actually has an impact at what you're doing at the moment. So that was it. And Auth0, thank you so much for your time and doing this again. It's been a blast to have you on. Where can people find you on the internet?
So they could find me at my website at auto.xyz. That's probably the easiest way to learn a bit more about me if you're interested, and also get in contact. So I have all my social media links on there. And then also you could find me on the Auth0 blog. I occasionally still try to find some time to blog. But other than that, you'll probably see me at a conference or a meetup. So if you do, definitely feel free to come by and say hi, and I would love to talk to you.
Very cool, very cool. And Auth0 you can find, of course, on auth0.com. I'll link it down below in the show notes. Thanks again, Auth0. And of course, for the listeners, you can find the Bits vs. Bytes podcast on bitsvsbytes.com, but also on Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. It's all bitsvsbytes, and all major podcasting platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all over the place. And I would like to thank you for listening, and until next time.